want to welcome all of you wonderful people out in Wattpad land to our July panel, which is all about the bad boys and the bad girls. We have for you 4 amazing panelists, and I am going to have them introduce themselves to you. And each of them is going to name someone from popular literature or from film who is one of their favorite bad boy, bad girl characters. So could we start with Daisy?
Hi, thank you so much, Deborah. So I'm Daisy. I'm a psychologist and a psychology teacher in my real life, offline. And on Wattpad, I actually joined in 2018, and I write mostly teen fiction, young adult romance with focus on mental health themes. And my most popular story is a bad boy story, so-called bad boys. And my favorite bad boy would probably be Hardin from After. I have a love-hate relationship with the character, so I would love to talk about bad boys today and bad girls, of course.
Wonderful. Okay, Donna.
All right, I'm Donna Taylor. I've been on Wattpad, I think, since 2015, but haven't really gotten too into it until the last couple of years. Actually, the primary genre that I write is young adult horror, but I also happen to write bad boys and bad girls with Hounds Unleashed and What They Wrought are 2 of my stories that really have those kinds of characters. And one of the popular culture characters that I really like is Loki. Like the darker, the kind of nastier, the better for me personally.
Also, he's pretty hot.
Yeah, that too. Yes, that doesn't
hurt
hurt him at all.
Okay, Tamara.
Hi, I'm Tamara Lush, and I've dabbled with Wattpad since late 2014, the year I started writing fiction. I didn't really get into it until about 2017, and my first book with Wattpad Books was published in March. It was called Drive, and that has a bad boy in it. I kind of specialize in bad boys, and right now I'm writing mafia bad boys on Wattpad. So I especially like the mafia bad boy trope. I think it's really a fascinating one to explore. The one that I wanted to talk about would be Beauty and the Beast, which I think that is the original bad boy of all bad boy stories, and where all of the bad boy trope kind of originates from.
That's true. That's brilliant. Mm-hmm. All right, Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane Peden. I've been with Wattpad since 2018. I'm wearing my Wattpad t-shirt today, which I got at the first thing I ever did right shortly after I joined Wattpad. Tamara actually, convinced me to go to WattCon, and then I just fell in love with Wattpad and all the amazing writers I met there, and I've been writing on Wattpad ever since. I write mostly romances featuring arrogant millionaire lawyer heroes. I happen to be a lawyer myself, so not that I run into lots of arrogant lawyers in my day-to-day life. Yeah, actually I do. So I write a lot of those. I also write thrillers, and my thriller on Wattpad, Paradise Thriller, has, I would call a bad girl, heroine. And if I'm looking at heroines, bad girl, heroines that I really like, I have to go to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Wanda Maximoff. Recently, if anyone's seen the recent, the new movie, Doctor Strange, how she goes full Scarlet Witch. And, what's just amazing about that character is she is doing really bad stuff, and we still love her. So we're still, part of us is cheering her on. So I'm excited to be here today and talk all about bad boys and bad girls.
Right. And I think that actually that is the key to bad boys and bad girls. Like there has to be something that makes us root for them, even if they're bad. Mm-hmm. So the reason we chose this topic is because we're getting ready for Wattys season here at WritersConnX. And it is one of the most popular tropes on Wattpad. So we thought it was important as we get our Watty entries ready to hear from some of the experts in this trope and make sure that we've created amazing bad boy and bad girl characters. So that's why we're doing this today. Okay, let's get started with the first question. And it is, what, in your opinion, constitutes a bad boy or girl when thinking about the outlaw love interest archetype? And what do you think this archetype, why do you think it is so beloved? Why do readers love reading about this kind of character? So let us start with Jane this time, since you're already
okay. Well, I think people love rule breakers. People like to think of somebody who goes outside the lines. Look at in Star Wars, where you've got the original Star Wars, where you have Luke Skywalker, who is all goodness, and then you have Han Solo, and a lot of people are really drawn, just like Leia, are drawn to Han Solo, who is the person who doesn't follow the rules and has this sort of an outlaw, image to him. And I think there's a wide range too that you can do with bad boys. It's everything from like the arrogant millionaires that I write to misunderstood rebels who maybe aren't really bad, but society perceives them as bad, so we relate to them and we want to fix them, to international jewel thieves, to Tamara's mafia bosses. So it's just such a nice wide range that you can play with.
It's true. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. I think we all know that Wattpad, a lot of the readers are younger. And I remember reading a lot of probably inappropriate material when I was younger. And I think that reading about bad boys kind of takes some of their power away, especially for younger women. Younger women and women of all ages obviously have, we confront a lot of issues with male patriarchal power, and reading about bad boys and reading about taming a bad boy, there's something powerful about that, and it makes you feel empowered by writing it and by reading it. And I think that sort of subtle subtext has to really plays into the bad boy trope.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. Daisy, you probably have something to add to that as a psychologist.
Yes. So when I joined Wattpad, all I saw was bad boy stories. And after reading quite a few of them, because I was not a preteen when I joined, obviously I was in my early 20s. And I realized that, oh my God, this is a lot of romanticization of toxic and abusive behaviors. And that kind of led me into considering something that we as authors, I'm sure everyone on this panel already considers this: what is the impact that our stories or our characters, that they can have on the people reading those stories. And I think what makes Bad Boys so entertaining and so attractive, so to speak, to younger readers or readers of all ages, it's that we all want some thrill in our lives. We all have very boring lives. Most of us have boring lives. We have school, we have homework, we have parents who want us to follow the rules. So reading about bad boys and bad girls, it kind of gives us that vicarious thrill that we get from seeing them. Oh my God, they're doing whatever they want and they're getting away with it, but they're still, maintaining a moral boundary. And that's something that we kind of vicariously live through. So perhaps that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Anyone else have anything to add before we move on to the next?
I'll just add on to what Daisy was saying. Like, I think whether we want to admit it or not, and I've learned this about myself in my dark romance road to wherever that I've gone on, is that we see some of ourselves in these characters, especially personally with the bad girls, because they're flawed and they exist in the world that we've written for them just completely unapologetically. And they don't conform to societal expectations, but they're still there and they're still thriving and they're still pushing through. So I think because we can see ourselves in these characters too, it makes some of what we're feeling just a little bit better, a little bit more realistic. And I think that's why we can connect with these characters as well, despite the things that they're doing on the page.
Okay, great. All right, let's move on here. And this question is, have bad boy or girl romances changed over time? And, you know, we all started giving an example, and some of the examples are older and some are newer, which shows that, you know, that it is a, you know, time-honored tradition to write about this. But have the characters changed, or are they the same as they were? Well, Donna, you're already front and center. You want to start with that one?
I think there's definitely comfort in some of the more traditional tropes, especially the more heteronormative tropes where you have like the big bad guy and the more submissive woman who needs to be protected. Like you see that in Twilight. I think Twilight is kind of safe fodder for us to talk about at this point. Like you have the all-powerful supernatural being and the very human breakable woman that needs to be protected from all of this. Mm-hmm. But I do think we're moving down another path. And if you're on TikTok, you might have seen some of the discourse, if you end up in that particular algorithm, of people desiring sapphic stories, desiring male stories, and desiring something that's a combination of all of those. And you see it with reverse harem and Why Choose, and you know, all of these poly romances. And I think there is definitely a need and a want to expand beyond the very typical big man, small woman trope.
Love that. Anyone else like to add to?
Yeah, I could add. I think a lot historically, when all the little paperback romance books started that were so popular, like back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and all the Harlequin stories, initially, I mean, it's kind of shocking to go back and look at some of them now, because they're not just rapey, they have rape in them. I mean, and they have the heroine who is kidnapped, and, you know, she's always a virgin, and she's kidnapped by, you know, the sheik or the pirate. And, you know, and a lot of them, that's where you get the term bodice rippers, because a lot of these books were rapey. I think it reflects a lot of the societal norms and the guilt that women had about sex at that time. And kind of the idea was, well, you know, if I'm spirited away by this, you know, this wealthy, powerful figure, and he forces me to do things, then I don't have to feel guilty about liking it, which is like a weird way to look at, like, you know, rape, but they're not really supposed to be rape fantasies as much as, you know, I don't have any power, and now I'm not breaking any rules because I didn't have a choice. And I think we've evolved a lot since then, where you find more, if you look at the Harlequin books today, those romances, like the Presents and the Desires and that whole line, you have the rich, powerful men, and they're not forcing themselves physically on women, but they're using circumstances. You have the millionaire who forces the woman into a marriage of convenience, or he's going to bankrupt her father, his business rival. And you have these circumstances that bring them together. But something encouraging is you're starting to see the women as being much, much stronger in those books, you know, too. So I think that's been kind of an evolution.
Yeah. Well, as society has changed, so has what we enjoy reading.
See, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to step in here and actually kind of disagree with everybody, because I actually think that especially times like we're in now politically, I think that when women don't feel like they have agency, I think that romance kind of reflects it. Like there's a big debate on TikTok about I think it's a paranormal romance where the hero, who is some spiritual paranormal being, and I think the heroine might be too, maybe Donna has heard of this, the hero breaks her legs or so she can't leave. And that's like really, I mean, this is all over TikTok. And I do feel like there are some books, you know, somebody in the comments said, you know, a bad boy, there's a difference between an abusive man and a bad boy. And like, I think about this a lot when writing. Like I have, you know, I've written some bad boys. They're drug dealers, they're mafia hitman, but when they meet the heroine, they would never hurt her. And, you know, after taking her virginity that she begged him to do, he gets her Oreos. Like he's a soft and gooey person for the heroine, because I personally cannot write really harsh. I've set out to try to write, really gritty romance, and it always comes back to, well, yeah, maybe he's not really kidnapping her, but it always comes back to him being a softie for the heroine, because I cannot go down that path, but a lot of authors can, and they're very popular.
Okay. All right. Something for everyone then. Okay. So now we've talked a lot about romance, the romance genre here. And I know some of you write in other genres. Is there room in other genres for a bad boy, bad girl character? And how is it different from writing a romance? Tamara, you're already up.
Well, I do write cozy mystery, but I will say that is probably the one genre where you can have a totally soft and not even a cinnamon roll, just a full-on gooey, soft, sweet hero, and it's completely okay. And I say that, and I absolutely love writing my hero in my cozy mystery series, because even though he's a cop, he is actually just completely sweet to everybody, and there's no bad boy at all there. So I don't think there's a place for bad boys in cozy mystery personally. That's just me. But other genres like horror or science fiction, I would suspect there are places for bad boys and bad girls.
Anyone have thoughts on that? Anyone else?
So I read a lot of historical fiction for some reason, even though I've never written it. I also enjoy a lot of mystery thrillers, and I don't really mind a bad boy. Again, it has to be a well-written bad boy that is flawed, but we're still rooting for him because he comes from a good place. And he has a good heart. And even if he's done things that he's not proud of, we know that that is a good person, underneath all of the bad that we have portrayed. So I think as long as it's a well-written bad boy, it can be any genre, and the readers are just gonna, we're gonna take it because we're gonna love it because we relate to it.
Right. Okay. Well, that actually leads kind of into the next question, which is, it's about constructing a bad boy as a writer. And how important is it to have the right motivation behind that behavior, so that the reader can root for that character, even though he or she is bad? Daisy, do you want to start out since you're on screen?
Yes, sure. So recently I succumbed to the peer pressure and decided to read Colleen Hoover's books. And I think those are a great representation of where we draw the line. I saw that question in the chat as well, where do we draw the line between a bad boy and a boy that is just abusive?
Right.
And I think she's done a really good job. So Miles is an example from Ugly Love. He's kind of portrayed as a bad boy in a sense, because he's not ready for commitment. He's closed off. He's emotionally unavailable. But he's very upfront, he's very honest, and we understand why he's the way he is, and why is he emotionally closed off, and why is he not ready for commitment. So we still root for him at the end. And of course, there are readers who are going to disagree with that because of their own personal opinions and perspective, which is perfectly okay. The other book, It Ends With Us, is, again, a kind of parallel between two characters. So the main character, whose name I completely forgot just now, he's an abusive boy, right? He's a bad boy, but he's abusive. And on the other hand, we have Atlas, who is a bad boy, but he's not abusive. So he might be homeless, he might be hiding, he might be keeping a lot of secrets, but he's a good person, and he's just there because of things that have gone wrong in his life. So it's very important to not only give our bad boys the motivation that makes their bad behavior kind of understandable, but also give them redeeming qualities. So even if they're bad, there are things that still make them human and things that still make them likable. It could be them being a good brother. It could be them being good to homeless people. It could be them just being honest and upfront and being sincere and being loyal. It just has to be something that we can root for.
I agree. Anyone else have any thoughts about writing a bad boy girl character and the motivation that helps make them likable?
Daisy made me think of something there, but there's a famous book by Susan Elizabeth Phillips. I'm trying to think of the name of it, Sweet something. but it's about the heroine is comes across as horrible. I mean, she's this really bad person who, like, you know, has just ruined people's lives from the time she was like a teenager. But the one thing that the author does in the beginning is that she's driving into town, but she has with her this just really like annoying little dog that she picked up, but she keeps it. And the fact that she doesn't want this dog, but the fact that she takes care of this dog, it's like, if you show your villain do one little kind thing towards an animal, towards a person, then it kind of opens the door. And I think, like Daisy said, just the motivation is key. Whether you're writing a bad boy in a romance or just a straight out villain, I mean, that whoever that character is, their actions have to be justifiable in their own eyes. And it can be a very warped justification, but they become real to the reader. And the reader develops some level of empathy when they understand why the person's acting this way, even if they disagree with them. So I think that motivation is really key. You just can't decide, okay, I'm going to have this, I want to write a bad boy, so I'm going to have this character do all these random bad things. And then readers will like that because readers like bad boys. That's not going to work. That's not going to get you to the Wattys. You have to, you gotta to write the character so that their motivation is something that the reader can get a hold of and say, yeah, horrible thing that guy did, but it makes sense from where his head was.
Save the cat.
Yep, save the cat.
Anyone else have anything to add?
I think it goes back to the reader seeing a part of themselves in the character, whether they want to see that part of themselves or not, and just understanding, like you can understand someone's motivations without agreeing with them. So if you see how they're playing out on the page and they had a bad childhood and then they had whatever the motivation actually is, the reader needs to be able to connect those dots and go, okay, I understand why this character is acting the way that they're acting. Don't agree with it, but I get it.
Right. That's absolutely true. Anyone else have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. Let us see. We kind of talked about this, but maybe you have more to say about the line between arrogant behavior and abuse. So, and then also thinking about that in YA, which, younger readers, is there a line that we need to draw in creating these characters for younger readers? Donna, do you want to start?
Sure. So I actually don't write romance in young adult, despite the fact that young adult is my primary genre. I do not write romance in it. I typically do not like the romance that is portrayed in young adult for a variety of reasons. And again, going back to Twilight and the dynamic between Edward and Bella, I even to this day, despite the fact that I've come a long way in terms of viewing romance, I still don't see that relationship as a good one. Him ostracizing Bella from all of her friends and family, that's like emotional abuser 101, like sneaking into her bedroom to watch her sleep without her permission. That's restraining order territory. I cannot suspend my disbelief enough to be like, oh, but he's just being sweet. Like, no, that's call the cops territory. But I think it can be done. It's just, I without like moralizing, because I don't like doing that with young adult, because with adult, we can all come to the table and go, this is fantasy. Even if it's a contemporary or if it's actually sent in a fantastical setting, this is all fantasy and we are agreeing to that fantasy, whatever that fantasy is. It's really gray when it starts getting into young adult because they're not adults. And they should be treated as, fully functioning human beings that can have reason and common sense, but I do think that is very delicate. So I don't want to say it doesn't have any place in young adult, but I think it takes a very delicate hand to do that well in YA.
Do any of you guys write young adult bad boy girls?
I do.
Okay.
So my former paid story and currently exclusive story before I became a star, before I became a creator, all of that, that was actually a bad boy, kind of a bad boy. It was clickbait, but mostly because I made it seem like he's a bad boy because he's like that loner who nobody talks to, and there's lots of rumors surrounding him. But then it was actually a story surrounding domestic abuse and a lot of violence at home and being a very, very tumultuous home relationship. And I completely agree with Donna. It's a very fine balance. So he's actually a very shy person. That's why he doesn't talk to other people. So yes, it's definitely a very hard thing to do. But I've realized that as authors, as much as we would like to say, oh, we're just writing for ourselves and we're just writing because these are our fantasies, we do have some kind of a responsibility as well towards our readers, especially if we label our story as young adult or young adult romance, because we are subconsciously or consciously kind of reinforcing certain beliefs that they might have. So initially I mentioned after, and it's very abusive. He was very controlling. He was not just a bad boy. He was actually a bad guy in certain aspects. But lots of teenagers actually romanticize that. And I still see a lot of like Edward over Jacob arguments. But it as fine as a balance it might be, I think as authors, especially living in the world that we are now, kind of giving women, empowering our female characters to deal with those bad boy situations, because whether we like it or not, young girls will fantasize about bad boys because it's just more exciting. It's more, thrilling. It's just cooler, especially as compared to a geeky boy who like doesn't brush his teeth or comes to class and he's sleeping on the desk. Of course, they're going to fantasize after bad boys, right? But that's where we come in and we tell them, hey, these are boundaries. If he does these things, it's okay. And, this is where you need to draw the line. And then we prioritize consent. We talk about boundaries. We talk about moral obligations. We talk about the impact that their behavior, bad boys' behavior, can have, the consequences of being with such a person. And maybe we can make this kind of like a teaching situation where we're not directly lecturing the teenagers that, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. Stay away from these kind of people. But we're subtly reinforcing certain positive behaviors instead of negative ones. And I saw that question. I think Mason, I don't know who asked, but somebody was like, do you make your female lead end up with the good boy instead of the bad boy? I do that so often, and there's always like a battlefield in the comment section because so many people like the bad boy more, but I always choose the good guy at the end because I want women to know that good boys can also be exciting. It's not that they're just boring and they have no flaws, and they're just nicer. That doesn't make them boring. Or so yeah, I went on a complete tangent here.
No, but you know what? You made me start thinking about evolution and how, thousands and thousands of years ago, the female wanted to have children with the provider, the one who could go out and, fight lions. So, that was how you could continue the human race. But, things are changing now, and it's sort of the geeky, brilliant tech, men who are inheriting the earth, kind of. The meek are inheriting the earth. And I wonder if that's going to change women's desires going forward, because they're the ones who can, who will be the caregivers in the future. I know that's probably controversial. The women can be the caregivers too, but just saying, your answer made me think of that. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Just briefly, I think it all goes back again to motivation. Whether you're writing bad boys in romance or other genres for adults, or whether you're writing them for a YA audience, that the key is to have the reader be able to understand why the character's acting the way he is, and not just, I hate the whole sort of like bully romance stuff where just girls falling for the guy who was the bully just to be mean for meanness sake. I think you can have a character do bad things in YA and in adult but you've just got to properly motivate them. And the motivation can't be, I like to hurt people. I mean, that's not, that can't be the whole motivation behind it. And then I think, I think we have to.
I'm a sadist.
Well, there's a place for that, but I think it should be in thrillers and not in romance. Yeah, we don't want this. Yeah, we don't want somebody, who's a sadist. We want, people who we can understand, why they're acting the way they are. And confession here, I love Twilight. I think, and it came out when my daughter was in middle school, and it's responsible for her becoming a reader. And, she had never really gotten into reading before. And, I do think that, for me, Twilight passes the test because we understood the motivation between all of the creepy things that Edward Cullen did. And in the final analysis, I can say, yeah, he had his heart was good. He did things for a good reason. He was a little warped on what he did, and his reasons might have been a little twisted, but he never was motivated by a desire to hurt Bella. And that's kind of like something Tamara said, I think, early on too, about you can have somebody who does horrible things in the mafia, somebody who tortures people, kills people, but as long as he doesn't hurt, the heroine, then I think then that to me is the line you shouldn't cross when you're writing, and don't, especially in YA, and not create a romantic ideal of a person who is cruel for no reason.
Right.
I also think that we should I also think that we should be open to writing bad girls with bad boys. There was a question in the comments about who do you pair the bad boy with? You always pair him with a good girl. I wrote a book about a mafia character, Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang. And it turned out, that the heroine, who was a virgin, but that didn't mean that she was pure and wonderful and nice all the time. In fact, she wasn't. Most of my female characters are very difficult people. And I think that that's really important in romance in general, that we show that difficult women deserve love as well. Because a lot of us are difficult. I'm a difficult person in real life, and my husband still loves me like 99% of the time. And I deserve love just like we all do. So, and then at the end of Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang, it turned out that the heroine, my heroine, she embraced her bad side and went into the mafia with Alessandro, the mafia guy. And actually, it turned out that she killed more people in the book than the mafia guy did. And a lot of readers were like, oh, I want to see an epilogue of her being like a mafia queen. Like, they were super into it. So I would just my advice would be, don't shy away from showing your heroine be badass, really, I'm not the person to do this, but I think if somebody wanted to do a female mafia romance, that it would really be an amazing thing. Don't be afraid to have your female characters be bad. I probably, not many of you, I don't know how many, I won't spoil it. I won't say what my heroine did, but it's really like, if I told you, you all would be like, at the end, like the actual dark moment is not actually between her and the love interest. It's from an external force, and she kills them. And so I think that you should be open to having a bad girl alongside your bad boy, because really, who else is going to understand a bad boy but a bad girl?
I quite agree. I'm quickly going to add that yes, absolutely. And I see there's quite a market on Wattpad for that kind of a thing right now as well, because my story, which is joining paid program next month, is actually a bad boy, bad girl romance. And it's new adults, but readers seem to love it. And yes, they have a love-hate relationship with both the bad boy as well as the bad girl. But then at the end, they're like, okay, these people are meant for each other. And yeah, we love them as a couple. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to think of like the virginal young girl who's like the human equivalent of a lamb being with this monkey guy. I mean, my heroine was a virgin, but that was not, that was kind of incidental. She still had, these bad traits about her, and she embraced it. And that's like, you can see them being together for those reasons. And each of them had reasons, like Jane is talking about. Each of them had motivations for being in the mafia world, except that my heroine chose it far more than the hero did. The hero was born into it, and she was too, but she could have walked away and doesn't.
And to Tamara's point, like, that's why I write the women that I write, because I personally do not want to read the stories about the little lamb and the big bad dude that needs to be protected. I don't want to see that. I want women that can go toe to toe with their love interest. So like in Hounds Unleashed, my female protagonist starts off as an assassin. She has a body count already.
I would highly recommend this book, by the way.
Thank you. And when she gets into with her other love interests, every single person, their baseline is murderer. Like there is not like, but I don't portray that on the page. Like they're human on the page. It just happens to be a job they do. And then in What They Wrought, which is my paranormal historical romance, maybe the character's name is Maybe. She starts off kind of naive and like from a puritanical society and just gets exposed. And the story is her just circling the drain and spiraling and getting darker and darker and darker. And it's a very synergistically poor relationship that she has with one of her the male love interests. And they just feed off of each other, and you just watch it getting darker and darker and darker. And I like absolutely love that. And while Maybe can't go toe to toe with her male love interest physically, she can light him on fire with her mind. So I want the partner relationship instead of the unbalanced relationship that is more predominant in these kinds of romances.
Okay. You know what I found interesting, and I've kind of a question for the other panelists too. I always write in my romances, even though I have these billionaire, arrogant, lawyers, the female protagonist is always very strong and independent. And I've gotten some pushback from readers on that, where, when in one book, in particular that I have, like The Millionaire's Convenient Arrangements, it's one of my free books on Wattpad. And the heroine is very resistant of the hero's pushy way to well-meaningly kind of take over her life and her, and he's trying to help her and her little brother. And she resents it, and she really resists it. And I get a lot of comments from readers saying that, why is Maria so stubborn? Oh, she drives me crazy. I'm so annoyed at her. He's just trying to help her. Why is she being such a bitch? And I was a little shocked at first. And I wonder if anybody else has had that kind of experience of having a strong female character and having readers actually not like her for those reasons. I'm not going to stop anyway, but because that's how I write.
Yes,
but I was curious.
Happen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It happens way too often, more often than we'd like to admit.
Okay. Well, the thing is, like, we have these questions and we are answering so many of them just in our discussion, which I think is actually a better way to do it because, it's more natural. But let's just reframe some of the ideas. Do we as writers have a moral responsibility to redeem or reform the bad boy or girl character in order to create a happily ever after for our readers? Jane, do you want to start since you're already on my screen?
Sure. Well, if it's going to be a romance, you have to have the happily ever after or the happy for now, just kind of by the definition of a romance. Do you need to redeem them? It's kind of a tricky question because a lot of times, I think a lot of the bad boy characters that we write inside weren't really bad. So it's more a question of the reader and the heroine coming to understand them as opposed to redeeming them. But I do think that, a redemption arc is really a tried and true, time-honored, story arc for a character. And I mean, to go back to Star Wars again, it's when, in the first movie in Star Wars, then it's when Han Solo has gone off and then Luke is trying to blow up the Death Star and things are looking really dark. And then Han suddenly swoops back in the Millennial Falcon and starts, and sends Darth Vader spinning off into space. And it's like, yes, he's been redeemed now. He used to only care about himself and now he cares about others. So yeah, I think it is very powerful. I don't know that we have to do it, but it's a very powerful, story to tell.
Yeah.
I would agree, but I want to interject something.
Okay.
I think there have been some books, and they have gotten a lot of attention on Twitter and in some corners, that you can redeem any bad boy. And I want to caution you that just because you can write something and try to redeem them doesn't mean you should. And this falls under the category of white supremacists, Nazis, Stasi officers in Germany after World War II. Anybody who might be considered a war criminal probably should not get romance redemption. So don't I think the trope that we all know and hate, or maybe should, I'm being biased here, but the Nazi officer and the woman in the Jewish concentration camp, which might horrify and should horrify many of us, but not enough of us, because I've seen many trad and indie books about that very thing. And I think that we need to be very careful. There is a line, and if they are war criminals or racists, or, I won't go any further than that, but you can fill in your own blank. I don't think those types of people should get redemption in a romance, like personally.
And that's still happening. These are not old books. I just saw a pub lunch release of this German officer in this basically a concentration camp in the US, because that's where we put our POWs, and the woman who reforms him. And it's like, why are we still writing these stories?
Nazis
can't be reformed. Stop.
Nazis don't get a redemption arc. Sorry.
No.
Yes.
So
I quite agree. I don't think, sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do not think we should or can redeem every romance character, especially because we can't redeem every single person that we meet in real life. So if we connect it back to the moral obligation, we need to teach our readers as well that sometimes we're going to try our hardest and sometimes people are just not going to change. So in order to make our stories, if that's our purpose, a reflection of reality, then we do need to kind of, have characters that don't necessarily change for the better. They might change for the worse. They might become worse over the course of the story. And that's where the character arc comes to play. It doesn't always have to be a villain to hero character arc. It can just be a hero to villain character arc as well. And it just has to be, I do not think that we should redeem every single character. And that's not just for Nazis and war criminals. It's also for rapists or people who don't respect boundaries, or people who, support domestic abuse, or people who do not. There are so many things that we can go on and on about, and we don't have to redeem those characters. They're bad people. They should be known as bad people. It's just that.
Yeah, I would
Just
agree. I'd agree with that. Like in my dark romance, they don't become good people. I mean, that's part of it, is that both of them are not particular. Like in some ways, you wouldn't even say it's a romance because they're not redeemed. They find love, and they're happy ever after, but they're not, they're corrupt and, criminals basically. But they're not, war criminals.
Right.
I think there's a place for redeeming characters, but it's like that, truly bad characters, but that place isn't romance. I mean, you can have, and typically when you see it in movies or books that are not romances, you can see a villain who is somewhat redeemed and has a change of heart at the end, but the price is usually that villain's death. I mean, the villain doesn't get a happy ever after. And in that case, I think it works. You can have a villain who does have a last minute change of heart about something, and you can feel good about that, but that doesn't erase the the million people the villain called. I'm thinking back to the Star Wars again. Darth Vader and Kylo Ren aren't going to get a happy ever after. even though they do somewhat get redeemed and change their ways at the end of their respective movies. And I think that's okay. And you can write about, somebody, actually realizing they've been wrong and changing, but you can't do it in a way where you say, okay, so that erases all the horrible things that you did, and now we're going to let you be happy.
Right. Like you can get away with those things in like historical fiction, but if we're talking strictly about romance and them having a happy ever after, that's a little different.
Right.
And it's funny because as I sit on this panel of romance writers, I will say I do not write romance. I happen to write other things that have romantic subplots. So for me, a happily ever after is irrelevant. I don't care. Like if this story calls for it, and if the story calls for that redemption arc for that character, cool. But that is not something, as someone who doesn't write primarily romance, I don't particularly care about that unless the story actually calls for it. That doesn't mean there can't be character growth or shrinkage, like, depending on which way they're going. But
No shrinkage in romance.
but then we get into the darker romances, and there are some dark romances, and I haven't read a ton of them, although I do find them particularly interesting, and I have expanded my to be read pile, but those are technically romances. So is there a redemption arc in those very dark romances? So I do think there might be a little bit of change in terms of how romance is defined. I think the happily ever after and the happy for now is still relevant, but I think of what that actually looks like may change depending on which subgenre in romance that you're writing.
Okay, well, in the, I don't know if any of you have written series with bad boys or bad girls, but do you have like a longer term arc for them? Like, are they maybe not redeemed in the first book, that, in the second or the third? Like, do you plan out long arcs for these bad boy girl characters? Daisy, you raised your hand.
Yes. I wrote my first and only series on Wattpad is actually a love triangle between a good girl, a bad boy, and a good boy. And while in the first book, yes, the bad boy is redeemed, and the good girl is kind of like, okay, I'll end up with him. He's great and he's getting better. But in book 2, there's a very downward kind of arc for the bad boy, and then he just gets so bad that there's no way that she can end up with him. And at the end of the third book, she ends up with the good boy, and the bad boy just spirals out of control. So yes, there is an arc. There's an overarching, like, larger arc that I have for each character throughout the entire series, but then there's a particular milestone that they need to get to at the end of every single book, because I want readers to keep coming back. And because they know it's a series, they know, okay, things are not just going to end at book 1. We have to read book 2 in order to understand where the characters end up. And yeah, it's not a happily ever after, especially not for the bad boy. So it's young adult, it's romance, but it's bad boy, it's good boy, it's a whole lot of things. And I completely agree with Donna. Not every story has to have a happily ever after. Yes, we do have that kind of pressure, especially if it's romance, that we need to have a happily ever after. But not every story has a happily ever after. We don't have, all of our relationships don't end up great, do they? And that's not the end of life. So yeah, we need to, again, reflection of reality. Tell readers that things will go wrong, things will have, downfalls, but we get up, we continue to live, and we find better people, we find better ourselves.
Right. Wow, that's brilliant.
Well, I think also, like, there's a difference between a romance and a love story. And so a love story does not have to have a happy ever after. Kind of when you label it romance, it's like you're signaling to the reader, this is going to have a happy ending. And I think that's important. It's kind of like by labeling a romance, you're making a promise to the reader. And then the reader feels safe, that they can kind of go to these dark places and worry and have terrible things happen to the characters, but they know that it will all work out in the end. Because a lot of people, really read a romance because they want that happy ever after. But when you write a love story, a love story is Romeo and Juliet. They all die.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and there's plenty of of love stories out there, and books by authors like Nicholas Sparks. Really are a lot of them. He writes a lot of love stories. He doesn't write romance, typically.
Right.
So I think that's something we just think about too, that the label sends a certain message. So I think to some extent, it's not about, adding other things to the romance genre as much as it is making sure that we're identifying what it is we're writing. Are we writing a romance, or are we writing a love story, or are we writing a book that has romantic elements in it? And of the three, only the romance has to have the happy ending, or the happy for now.
All right. Well, we only have about 9 minutes left. So let's try to get a couple of questions from our listeners, viewers. And here's one. Does it worry you when you see people on the internet wishing they could find a real life relationship with a person who resembles an abusive bad boy character? And they point to romance and Wattpad stories written by you guys as inspiration for that desire.
I mean, this was a question that was asked a lot with the movie 365 Days, who, has one of the most handsome actors working today, this Italian guy named Michele Morone. Look up his Instagram. He's beautiful. Does it bother me? No, it doesn't. I guess because I'm old enough to remember when, those of us of a certain age, didn't we all think Mickey Rourke was pretty hot in 9.5 weeks? I mean, I don't know. I'm not thrilled about it for a young adult, but I understand the appeal. And I think people and young people are going to read what they're going to read. And I think that there are ways to show consent and respect between two people and still have them be a bad boy and allow people to have their fantasy.
Better to do it reading and, living your fantasy through the book than actually doing it in real life. Okay, here's another question. Do you think the bad boy trope is still fresh? And will it continue for a long time, or is it being morphed into something else? Tamara, since you're sitting there looking at me.
I think the bad boy trope will always be fresh. I think that, I think it will always be fresh. I think there's always an appeal. I think it's a matter of, when you write it, how, like Jane says, the motivation, and also the heroine and or the love interest, because maybe it's not a heroine, maybe it's a hero, another hero. How do they play off? And I think the writing, it's easy to write a bad boy in some ways. It's not so easy writing the character opposite them and showing their strength as well.
Right, giving that character agency. Anyone else?
I mean, they've been around for a minute. So it's obviously an enduring trope. And I don't just mean the past 20 years. I mean, we're probably talking thousands at this point. So I don't think it's going anywhere. It just morphs. And what that bad boy looks like is going to change based on the desires of the people on the other side of it.
Okay.
Yeah, they're really there in every genre. I mean, you can look at old Western movies and you have the gunslinger who comes to town. I mean, it's always, I think we're always going to have heroes who are bad boys, not just in romance, but in other genres as well.
I mean, Clarissa just said Dracula was a bad boy, 100%. Yeah. Especially Gary Oldman.
All right. Well, let's see. I'm kind of looking through all the questions, and I really feel like we've answered them. If you people out there in Wattpad land, if we haven't answered your question, you can find all of us on Wattpad or in the WritersConnX server, which I hope you guys are all members of. And also spread the word about WritersConnX, because we really want to connect with all the writers on Wattpad. Somebody is writing to me. Okay. So a few things just to finish up. I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys were the best panelists ever. And I want to make sure everyone knows that we're going to have our first in-person WattCon in I don't know how many years it's been, a few years. on November 19th in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And at that event, we're going to be announcing the Watty winners, not me personally, but Wattpad is. So it's going to be super fun. I am really excited. I'm going to be there. Are you guys going to be there? Show of hands, how many of our panelists?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. Tamara, you're going to be there. I know that.
Yes.
And speaking of Wattpad, I just want to give a shout out to Wattpad to thank them for sponsoring WritersConnX. We couldn't do this without them. And I don't know if you guys know, but I just want to mention that there's a whole backstage crew that works to get these panels together. And I want to give a shout out to them too. First of all, our tech and video master and the founder of the feast, Rodney V. Smith, who is backstage right now. And Mason Fitzgibbon, or Mason Fitzy, who has been channeling questions to me on the back end. And I want to thank Jane Peden's daughter, Megan, for getting her on today. We had submissions yesterday. And Morgan Ryder, who is another one of the planners. She put together the whole outline for today. And Zoe Blessing, who is our tech person extraordinaire. And I guess that's pretty much it, but it takes a whole crew. They put a lot of time and effort in, and I am grateful to all of you. So check out all of these incredible books. I am like itching right now to go and read all these bad boy books from our panelists, and follow them on Wattpad and social media. And we will see you next month for our next panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.